The unfiltered truth, ladies and gentlemen. That's the one thing that you didn't get throughout this whole Diddy saga, if you will. You've got a lot of speculation, a lot of salacious innuendos, a lot of misdirection, misstatements. What I need to do right now is I need to get into some of this straight game. Let's go.
Life is like cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.
Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's your boy DELRAY, Richardson, platinum artist, platinum songwriter, Straight Game TV. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. Do me a favor, click on the thumbs up button. Also subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And like I always say, if you want to be one of the first people notified when I drop some of this straight game, please do me a favor and click on what appears to be that little bell notification right below this video. I'm going to get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. The Diddy Trial, the raids, the so-called evidence, and the final verdict, ladies and gentlemen. The unfiltered truth. There was a lot of things that were said before, during, and there are a lot of things being said after the verdict has come in, right? You know, when we think about the shocking allegations and how we were sold this whole story about Diddy and this media rampage, if you will, as to what was going on versus what we eventually found out. You know, from the shocking sexual allegations to the federal raids, the evidence pulled from the homes that really turned out not to be really any evidence, the verdict that brought an end to one of the most intense celebrity criminal cases in hip-hop history, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to break it all down for you, if you will. And so, like I said, there's more than a celebrity, you know, scandal that kind of made this thing possible. It's a story about power, silence, protection, and what happens when the shield finally cracks, if you will. And so let's get into some of the straight game. And what I mean by that is, you know, throughout the years, we've seen Diddy at the Rock Nation parties and all of these various people, you know, around, and or we would assume they were friends. When the situation went down with Diddy, he had very few public supporters, if you will. I think if anything that was learned from this situation, I think that was the one thing that was learned, right? You know, and so as we started from the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, what really sparked the trial, I would say the trial of this century. Now, there was a situation where Diddy had filed a lawsuit against Diageo, which is a liquor company. They own Johnny Walker and a whole bunch of other brands, right? Diddy was alleging racism. And so they had settled the lawsuit with Diddy. And soon after they settled the lawsuit, if people really follow the timeline, that's when the story truly honestly began, because that's when Cassie Ventura filed her lawsuit, right? You know, she filed a lawsuit basically saying that they were going to put out a book, and they were demanding a certain amount of money for payment, which I think Diddy probably interpreted as some kind of shakedown, if you will. And I don't think that he thought that Cassie would go through with it, even the filing of the lawsuit. Let's be clear. So they were talking behind the scenes, going back and forth as to what they were going to do. But I don't think at that particular time that Diddy thought that Cassie would eventually file the lawsuit, right? So they filed the lawsuit, you know, in it she was alleging over a decade of the R word, you know, drug-fueled coercion, violent beatings, forced sex with male escorts in front of Diddy, physical abuse with firearms and other objects, surveillance and threats and intimidation. This is what she alleged basically in her civil suit, right? We know that case was settled quickly within 24 hours, but it kicked the door open, if you will, for more women to come forward. And then came the federal indictment, right? The federal indictment, the Department of Homeland Security and the federal prosecution launched a multi-state sex trafficking and racketeering investigation, ladies and gentlemen. Now, understanding what that was and what that was about, basically, they looked at Cassie's civil lawsuit and they say, oh, there's meat as well as potatoes in this that we can possibly turn into something, if you will. What I think when you think about it and you say, okay, if you're the government looking into it, okay, you say a racketeering. From the beginning, I think that the government knew that there wasn't any racketeering. I think that they have the power in which they do to basically go after you if they want to go after you. If you did the history on Sean P. Diddy Combs, you know his history interning at Uptown Records, start Bad Boy Entertainment. Eventually, the person that let him intern, Andre Harrell, he ended up giving Andre Harrell a job at Bad Boy, right? Funny how the tides turn, right? And so if you follow along, we knew that, from what we understood publicly, that Diddy was pretty much legit. He had built his way up from the ground up. You know what I mean? Started from the bottom now. He was here as being this big star. So if you looked at it from how it was supposed to be looked at with just two eyes and saying, hey, you know what? You can even go online and see like, okay, Sean P. Diddy Combs, how did he get his start? And you could basically see that racketeering was a bit of a stretch, but the government chose to go about doing it, right? So on March 25th, 2024, you know what I mean? The world watched as the federal agents raided Diddy's mansions in Los Angeles and Miami simultaneously, right? They knew he wasn't going to be there. They had been watching him and surveilling him and knew he was supposed to be out of town, if you will, so much so that they caught him at the airport. And that's when they caught the guy, Brendan Paul, with the drugs, if you will, the 27 grams of cocaine on that particular day, in which at that time, Brendan Paul said that the drugs were his. He made a mistake and so on and so forth, right? We know it wasn't a quiet operation. SWAT teams, helicopters, armored vehicles, something like out of a Hollywood movie, if you will. And, we're talking about when you want to make a spectacle out of somebody. Like I said, as we've seen so many years, if you've ever followed different cases, like when the government, they do a press release or things like that in regards to a drug raid or whatever it is, they try to make and have an optimal impact, if you will. And that they did. Like I said, all media stations, all networks were live in front of Diddy's house, mainly the one in off 200 Mapleton in near Beverly Hills, Homely Hills, if you will, right? They got laptops, hard drives, multiple burner phones, surveillance systems, especially in private areas, alleged BDSM paraphernalia restraints, customized furniture, a reported black room with locked safes, big flash drives, VHS tapes, high-end narcotics, in unmarked containers, right? Now, what you got to understand is there was a lot of rumors, if you will, that Diddy had these tapes of celebrities, high-level music executives, politicians, and all of these other things that he would use or could use or was using as blackmail material, right? Once that hit the fan, and that came from Little Rod's lawsuit, like I told y'all before, but once that hit the fan, we kind of got like, oh, okay. And, nobody knowing and everybody wanting to believe what they wanted to believe at that particular time was like, oh, yo, they got Diddy. Because it's the buildup and the downfall, if you will, right? Somebody built up, the Tupac thing lurking in the background, the arrest of Keefe D saying Diddy has something to do with it. people say, oh, they finally got him for something. You know what I mean? All of those things were being said. But if you paid attention, which a lot of people didn't, because a lot of people just living their lives, you would understand that everything that they were looking for or they were going on was based on Cassie's lawsuit. That's why I was basically unbiased and just looked straight down the middle from the beginning. You had Courtney Burgess, as well as Chris Todd was a white guy, and Ariel Mitchell was Courtney Burgess's lawyer, and they were going on these different television shows talking about that they had hard drives from Kim Porter, and they actually put out a book. Right, the book turned out to be a bunch of fluff and lies. Right, this happened soon after that Diddy was arrested. So when the book came out, the timing was like perfect. I was like, oh wow, you know what I mean? And it was suspicious more than it was anything to me. I was like, damn, the book come out all of a sudden. This was already prepared, already done. It mentioned a bunch of celebrities: Jay-Z, Will Smith, Justin Bieber, Lil Bow Wow, you name it, as being part of this cabal or celebrity ring that was doing all of these things, and so on and so forth. The book turned out to be 100% pure lies. Amazon removed the book from off of Amazon. And so with that being said, it seems like this thing was orchestrated and timed as far as the publicity and trying to the pile-on technique. Once Diddy was locked up, he was locked up. And it was the pile-on technique. I was like, damn, hold on. And so I did the interview with Chris Todd over on the Art of Dialogue, right? I basically dismantled the whole book. So, and it wasn't about the love of Diddy or anything like that. My thing was the Tupac thing and the stuff that he had said about Tupac, because a couple of things that he had mentioned in there, I was with and around Tupac at a couple of those incidents where things had happened. So I knew for a fact that he was lying, or at least it wasn't true about those parts, because I was there. And so I said that to myself. I was like, oh, wow. So as I did the interview, he was talking about these alleged hard drives of Diddy. And one thing that he had said that, if I if the world sees these hard drives, it's going to shake up the music industry. The music industry is going to collapse. And basically what they were parading on was the situation involving the alleged hard drives and what the feds had seized or hadn't seized or were going to seize or that existed involving these hard drives. And they were saying that from the book, because the book was a book alleging that Kim Porter had left some kind of diary and hard drives of crimes that Diddy had allegedly committed with young children, right? A numerous amount of celebrities. And this was the basis for the book, ladies and gentlemen, right? I come here to tell you that it was 100% all lies. So much so that Courtney Burgess, who was in connection with Chris Todd, went on a bunch of YouTube channels and started stating that, oh, he had this, he had that, the hard drives, and I seen him, and it's, oh my God, it's this, Diddy's gonna go jail for life, and all of these other things, right? With sitting next to his attorney, Ariel Mitchell. To Ariel Mitchell's credit, she was saying that, well, she hadn't really seen it, but like I said, but was yet still letting her client go on there and talk about what he allegedly had. So the feds listening, they basically subpoena Courtney Burgess. He comes in, testifies, no hard drives, ladies and gentlemen. The hard drives never existed. They were trying to make money off of that book, right? Which was a bunch of lies. So they lied on Kim Porter. They lied on Diddy. They lied on Will Smith. They lied on Jay-Z. They lied on Tupac. They lied on Justin Bieber. They lied on Bow Wow. None of the stuff that they put in that book happened. None of it, right? And so when you understand that, that was the thing that piqued me, right? Photographs were leaked. Like I said, when they did the press conference, you seen them bring out baby oil. and people went crazy. Oh, you had people coming out saying that the baby oil was spiked with drugs and all of these other things that simply were not true. Most of the baby oil wasn't even open. It was brand new. Astroglide, all of these other things that were private property of Sean P. Diddy Combs. So you think about it. The government does a press conference and they talk about baby oil and finding guns that were not illegal, guns that were found in safes in the security office in P. Diddy's home, right? So, like I said, but we are so, as the public, sometimes we are so used to the sensationalism of everything, right? People want to believe the worst because I guess it's entertaining or it's somehow satisfying. I really don't know what that is. But like I said, for me, I was looking at it from a different perspective than most people at that particular time. And so many people like, oh man, they got Diddy, it's this, that, and the other, and he was doing this. It was these big parties, these big sex parties and all of that. Basically, they started the freak off thing and these freak offs and all of that. When we came to find out what that was, it was Cassie, it was Diddy, and it was these other escorts, if you will. There was no big party. There was no tapes of celebrities and sports figures and politicians and, music executives. There was none of those things. Also, Little Rod was his lawyer with his lawyer Tyrone Blackburn. They were talking about Lucian Grange came down to Florida and him and Diddy went in the room and they were giving a bunch of insinuations about things that people wanted to believe the worst shit in the world about because that's just what they wanted to do, right? You told a story like, they even said, he was trying to Diddy was trying to market him off to Cuba Gooding Jr. And they were just, these stories were so outlandish. Like I said, I know some of these people. I'm like, what? Right? But like I said, listening to it from the mainstream media, people were beginning to believe it because Cuba Gooding Jr. had his own problems, I think, in touching some woman on the buttocks or something like that. And he settled the case. They made this big hoopla. Oh, he could do 20 years or Cuba Gooding Jr. could do all of this time. And you know what I mean? When they're selling it in the media, right? And it eventually evolved into a settlement, right? It was eventually about money. Diddy's situation. As you can see, it was eventually about money. Cassie got $20 million, 10 million from the Intercontinental Hotel. The girl Brianna, she won $10 million. All of these other people, right? So most of the people who testified in Diddy's case, most of them, not all of them, were basically suing Diddy for money. For one thing or another, right? So now, then you see the allegations just multiply. So in the mid-2024, Diddy was hit with multiple civil lawsuits and federal charges under the Mann Act, RICO statutes, and federal sex trafficking laws, right? Prosecutors alleged that Diddy ran decades-long operations involving recruiting women under false premises of career support, drugging them, and participated in sex acts, filming sexual encounters without consent, using employees to silence or intimidate victims, transporting victims across state lines for illegal sexual conduct. Witnesses included former bodyguards, two of Diddy's former assistants, several women whose names were redacted from the public record, a former artist who described Diddy as a predator hiding behind music, and all of these other things, right? One victim's testimony was particularly horrifying, describing a private room in Diddy's LA mansion where she claimed she was assaulted and filmed repeatedly under the influence of drugs she said that Diddy gave her. Now listen, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand. None of these things at that particular time we knew to be true. All we knew was that he had basically settled the lawsuit with Cassie, ladies and gentlemen, right? When you understand the truth behind it, right? Let's go over what it say. Sexual assault, filming sexual encounters without consent. None of that was brought up at the trial. Drugging them to participate in sexual acts. None of that happened. Everybody who was doing drugs, they know they was doing drugs because that's what they were doing. They tried to make it seem as if he was giving people drugs without their knowledge, right? Transporting victims across state line for illegal sexual conduct. That was basically the Mann Act at that particular time. And like I said, saying that he was using all of this and he was doing this for over 2 decades, if you will, right? Or should I say a decades-long operation, right? Simply wasn't true, ladies and gentlemen, as we came to find out. And then Diddy came out and basically asserted his position. Diddy, through his legal team, denied all the allegations as we knew, called them false, scandalous, and motivated by money. And we seen, yes, throughout the trial, that a lot of these allegations were motivated by money, right? His lawyers argued all relationships were consensual. There was no evidence of trafficking or coercion, right? We come to find that out that there was no evidence of trafficking or coercion, despite the government saying that's what they had, right? The search and seizure violated Diddy's constitutional rights. They tried to get this case dismissed. They failed. There were also, I believe, 3 motions during the trial for a mistrial, basically for prosecutorial misconduct, right? They all failed, right? Diddy didn't testify, as we know, during the trial. His silence was loud. He remained mostly out of the public eye, only releasing one video claiming, "I've been set up. They're trying to destroy everything I've built," right? And we remember that video on Instagram clearly after the Cassie tape and so on and so forth, and speaking through his lawyers. And so you can only come to understand what was actually going on, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, if you hated Diddy because you hated him because he was rich and black and lived a lifestyle that very few people live, then that's your fault. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, just because somebody's successful does not make them guilty of what you think they did or what the government is alleging that they've done, right? Now, I given you yesterday the situation involving the Mann Act, right? And so now, as we dealt with the final verdict, ladies and gentlemen, the court decided, the jury decided, a jury of 12 people listening to the evidence, right, and coming to a conclusion. So after a 6-week trial, right, that captivated the nation as well as parts around the world, the jury came back with a verdict on January 1st, 2025. Guilty on the following counts, right? Not guilty on the following counts, right? Not guilty under the RICO Act, right? The only thing that they found Diddy guilty on was the violation of the Mann Act, right? No obstruction of justice at all. None of those things, like I said, once again, they were alleging that he even tried to obstruct justice while he was in prison. That was an allegation. None of that was founded, ladies and gentlemen. None of it. The sex trafficking wasn't founded. The obstruction of justice wasn't founded. The conspiracy under the RICO Act wasn't founded. None of the predicates under the RICO Act were founded. The only thing that they found Diddy guilty of was basically tricking. That was spending money on a woman, and like I said, when they would travel, he would go to Florida, go to Turks and Caicos, to go to LA, and they would have these freak offs in hotels. That's basically what they found, a violation of the Mann Act, right? And I gave you the video on that yesterday if you want to check that out. But so he was acquitted, right, on the 2 counts related to the narcotics trafficking, citing lack of physical evidence. The judge called the operation an egregious abuse of wealth, fame, and power to exploit, control others for decades, right? That simply wasn't what it was, though. It didn't come out to that. And like I said, Mark Agnafalo, Diddy's attorney, like you said, thank God for the jury process, if you will. You know what I mean? Because the 12 people basically, and they've come out since then and said, hey, you know what? We went by the evidence. We looked at everything. They went by the evidence. They said, hey, look. And like I told people, I said, well, if they're having a hard time because they had came back with a partial verdict first, I said to myself, well, if they have a partial verdict, but they can't come back clear on the RICO, then I'm thinking, hey, man, it might be, in his favor, because the RICO, you needed the two underlying predicates to come up with that for that to work out. And so that's what gave me a little bit insight as to why that was and what that, could partially look like or possibly look like, without actually knowing the facts behind that, right? And so once again, he will be sentenced, right? It's scheduled for September 2025, with prosecutors recommending 30 years to life is what they were recommending, right? That didn't happen either, ladies and gentlemen. With the Mann Act, like I said, there is no mandatory minimum. And so if sentencing is going to happen in around September, if you will, July, August, September, we'll see as to what the judge really, recommends for Diddy at that particular time. Most people could say, well, him getting out, I thought he should have been released on bail. Like I said, once again, I thought that what the judge had said in regards to him, why he wouldn't release Diddy on bail, I didn't really see that. I thought that, with him saying that, hey, that Diddy, there's no way for him to possibly show that he wouldn't be a threat to society. The only way you can possibly show that is if you give him a chance, right? From that perspective. Like I said, once again, the judge decided against that. And so now we're going to be waiting until in and around September to see, what the judge decides. He could give him time served and probation. He could give him more time. Like I said, once again, we don't know. Like I said, as much as people have been going online saying that what they think Diddy's going to get and so on and so forth. But I knew when they said, when Mark Agnafalo said, we demand his immediate release. And the judge was like, I'm not going to decide that right now. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, no RICO, no trafficking, none of the things that the government said that he did, right? So now are we now, holding him just to hold him because, of what he might do? You know what I mean? Or, like I said, I understand the theory and why they would think that. But like I said, we have to go along with the facts here. The fact of the matter is he was only found guilty of the Mann Act. You know what I mean? Despite the domestic violence which they owned up to. After paying Cassie her money, Diddy didn't try to go after her, right? He was dealing with it all and basically taking it all in. He had to, right? Hoping that, it would just go away and so on and so forth. Then came the government with the RICO case. So it didn't go away. And so he was left to deal with that and fight for his life. Like I said, once again, basically, we seen Diddy's music be removed from multiple playlists. Ciroc, De Leon partnerships were permanently severed. Several former bad boy artists have spoken out, you know what I mean? Some in support of victims, others distancing themselves from both sides. Revolt TV cut ties with new leadership, stating they're rebuilding the brand from the ground up. Like I said, so, and meanwhile, like I said, the culture's divided. Really, none of the people who we've seen publicly at these parties with Diddy, like I said, the Rock Nation, brunch or whatever, a lot of them were silent. We've seen that Jay-Z was brought into the situation, which that case turned out to be a total hoax and absolute fraud and lie against Jay-Z and Diddy. That was another thing that people weren't really paying attention to. But once it was filed, the media grabbed onto the horns and tried to ride with that. Now you don't even hear them say anything in regards to that anymore, ladies and gentlemen. They don't even speak on that because it was all lies. And so with that being said, I brung that up in the middle of what I was saying in regards to this case going on. I said, look, pay attention to this Jay-Z and Diddy thing that they tried to do civilly, right? They brung a Caucasian female in there, a young white girl who Diddy nor Jay-Z ever met in their life. She wasn't at no party in 2000 when Diddy was dating Jennifer Lopez. It did not happen, point blank, period. It was all made up, right? I tried to point that out to people. Once it went away, people stopped talking about it. They stopped talking about things that, it was a nothing burger. Or they don't even say that. People just, kind of move on with their life. They grab the bullshit And then once the bullshit turns out to be fried ice cream, they like, drop it. It's cold. It's not hot like I thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? No. Once again. So now, others argue that this is overdue justice for victims silenced for too long. So now, once again, because you see a lot of people like Tisa Tells and all that act like they're advocating for victims. Ladies and gentlemen, I was the first one to say, like, there are real women out here going through real situations, dealing with real trauma, real abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, this is simply not it. It's not it. It wasn't it, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't it. And like I said, you can't grab on to Diddy's case or Diddy's situation and say that somehow it is a representation or argue that this is overdue justice for victims silenced for too long. That had nothing to do with Diddy's case. That wasn't what that was at all. So people are misappropriating their feelings in regards to how they feel about Diddy because, well, in their situation, they hadn't got justice. They didn't speak out. They were silenced or felt like they were silenced. It simply wasn't that. Though I do respect and honor the women who've come forward who were actually mistreated in other circumstances that we may never hear about. I need that to be understood 100%, ladies and gentlemen. But attaching your feelings, emotions to the Diddy case and trying to make him the object of your anger and discontent, right, is misplaced. This is not what that was. These were girlfriends, Cassie, 11 years. A girlfriend, Jane, from 2020 to 2024, and still he's paying her rent today while he sits in the Metropolitan Detention Center, ladies and gentlemen. This was not your situation. This did not represent something that you had been done wrong on, and somehow you can misplace your feelings with the Diddy situation. I just try to tell people that. Like I said, many in hip hop are asking, well, who else knew? Who else knew what? Nobody knew anything based on the fact this was things that was done with his girlfriend, him, and male escorts, right? So those were the people that knew. They only had 2 male escorts to come and testify, right? I think if they would have had more male escorts come and testify, I think they might would have got the sex trafficking, but it simply didn't work, right? Many in hip hop are asking, who else knew? And will they be held accountable? Because they've thrown out this conspiracy theory that, it's this, it's that. Like, look, rich and powerful people do what they do, like poor and broke people do what they do. Anything happening in your bedroom is your private business. Point blank, period. Like I said, there was never a 911 call, never a police report, never none of those things involving this situation, ladies and gentlemen. You know what I mean? So when we think about, the big picture, right? What they were trying to say is like, and here's a little bit of the uncomfortable truth. On certain levels, and this is true as we've seen the money this cases settle and people go quiet. This wasn't about just Diddy, right? This wasn't about Sean Combs. It was about how money shields monsters, right? How fame buys silence, and how fear is used as currency. In some ways, yes, that's true, right? In the Diddy situation, I can't say that it was all true, but partially true in certain situations, but would be speculation because what was found out as the testimony was given, right? He wasn't convicted of that. So it would still be an allegation or speculation at best. I don't care what I want to believe. You know what I mean? Because I don't live day in and day out with Diddy. I don't know what's going on. We just heard what people came and testified to, and we were playing the jury of public opinion, if you will, right? And so you choose to believe what you choose to believe. If you don't believe it, then you don't believe it. Like I said, doesn't make me any difference at all, right? And they were alleging for decades Diddy was the face. For we know this for a fact. Well, for decades Diddy was the face of hip hop. Now he's a cautionary tale. That's what they tried to make him, a cautionary tale. It really didn't work out that way. Like I said, he got convicted of the Mann Act, and that's basically tricking, paying a girl for, paying for sex, if you will. That's tricking. That's not a bad thing as most people would like to think it is. You know what I mean? You know, the moral stooges will say, hey, well, you know, no, they didn't get what they wanted. The jury said that they looked at the evidence. They didn't see what the jury, or what I said, should I say, buy what the jury was selling. And it's just simple as that. You know, you don't have to like it. Like I said, Tisa Tells, you know, has basically snapped and lost her whole mind in regards to what she was trying to sell. It just didn't work. She was selling RICO. They'd improved the RICO, and when it came back, not like she was selling it, she got mad at the world, starting to call the jury dumb people, you know, all of this tyranny and all of this other stuff that she was alleging, like I said. And when they talk about that, 12 jurors stopped that tyranny from happening on either side, from the government or from Sean P. Diddy Combs. He's in prison at this particular time, right? And so when we understand what that is, not guilty. On the most serious charges, guilty of the Mann Act. And like I said, if you want to watch the video that I did on the Mann Act just yesterday, you'll understand where I was coming from with that also, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, yeah, that was basically the summation of what it was. But most people did not pay attention to the fact that when they brought the case, when Tony Busby brought that case against Diddy and added Jay-Z to it, and then was forced to drop it against Diddy and Jay-Z, I knew that the money grab was on. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I guarantee you, this is just for you to pay attention to. You will not see any more cases come up like that against Diddy. You won't. We know who he is. We know what he likes. We know about the watching, creating his own porn, watching his girlfriend or whatever have sex with another man, and him joining, and all of the other things that we've come to find out. Mia, her situation, and her alleging that Diddy sexually assaulted her, the jury didn't buy it. They were like, that's not, they sat there and listened to that. That was like, when she said that, now that we know from coming from Cassie and this girl, that ain't what he liked, right? So in the truth coming out about what he liked versus her saying that he did all of these things and they were on a plane and all of this, it was unbelievable. They didn't believe it, ladies and gentlemen. You know, like I said, if you want to dislike Diddy because you want to dislike Diddy, I'm talking about truth, justice, and applying the law as it's supposed to be applied. Not because I feel some way about something. And like I always tell people, you have a right to your feelings, but your feelings don't make you right. You know what I mean? And you can put everybody out your house that don't agree with you. And then they don't agree with me, y'all get out. I don't want to be around you. Okay, cool. Because they don't want to be around you no way with that. If you don't believe what I'm saying, then, I don't want you around. Absolutely. And they don't want to be around you. You see what I'm saying? Because you have people who think like that. Like, you know what? Well, I'm saying this. Okay, no, you know what? We'll see you later, and you can wallow in your misery and your hate and your dysfunction and believe in what you want to believe instead of really educating and informing yourself as to the laws, to the facts, because it was very slippery slope and it was dangerous of what was going on. Like I said, what happened in his bedroom or hotel rooms, that was his business. That wasn't for us to hear. We heard all of that. Who cared? We didn't care about that. RICO situations you seen with the mafia and all of that, we understand how that works, right? That wasn't what Diddy was doing. He was just living his life how he thought he should live his life. Whether we liked it or not, thought it was cool or not, the jury decided. 12, what they like to say, 12 people, he was judged by 12. And that's it. Your boy DELRAY, ladies and gentlemen. Straight game.
Life is like cards. It's not what you dealt, but how you play it. Play each situation correctly. I remember they used to laugh at a brother.